Hi, my name is Jessica Pearson, and today I will be talking about the due process rights that parents are entitled to in the special ed referral process, and also a few of the systems that are used for assessment, eligibility, and placement of students. Before I begin my presentation, I just want to reiterate an idea that I think is important to consider throughout, and that is the importance of parents in the process of referring their child. And I think it's very important to keep that a positive relationship and work together collaboratively to ultimately work toward the same goal of serving the best interest of the child. A few verses I think that are helpful to remember in this process is Philippians 2:14, do everything without complaining or arguing. Again, to keep a positive atmosphere between parents and not argumentative or adversarial. And also Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. I think as educators we need to respond gently and kindly to parents, even if they are upset or confused about an issue with their child. We can really communicate with them effectively and productively. That being said, I'd like to define due process. And these are procedures that are designed to safeguard the rights of students with disabilities and their parents. It's designed to provide protection to families during the whole process of assessment, evaluation, and certification. Again, they are an important part of the team, and their rights need to be protected, and they need to be informed of those rights as well. These are dictated federally, but also need to be fine-tuned at the state and local levels, just so we can consider individual needs and preferred practices among districts. There is a handbook that outlines procedural safeguards for parents by the CDE, and that is provided to them anytime there's an initial evaluation of their child or a change in programming, or if they requested it any time. That can be found on the CDE website, which is cited at the bottom of this slide. And I've also included a summary handout that just provides a general overview of that information. During the assessment process, parents have the right to participate and also the right to be involved in decisions that come about from that assessment. So this means that they need to be notified before assessment is completed. They need to receive written notice in their native language or preferred form of communication and provide consent for this initial evaluation to begin. The school needs to show that they've gone through reasonable efforts to contact the parent, and their consent is outlined further in the Procedural Safeguards Handbook. This means that they've been fully informed, they understand what is being asked, and that their consent is voluntary and that they have the right to revoke that consent. Also during this process, parents are entitled to request an independent educational evaluation outside of the school's assessment if they believe that is needed. Also, they have the right to confidentiality during the process. And as a school, we are entitled to keep that confidential all throughout each process. Beyond assessment, when the student is being determined whether they're eligible for services, the person making the referral must describe the problem, tell how long it's been going on, and discuss the types of modifications that have been introduced to it to solve the problem. And this is all information that the parent needs to show that the teacher made an attempt to intervene prior to referring the student, which will be discussed later with some of the models for pre-referral interventions. During this time, parents have the right to access records of assessments or any other educational records related to their child. They have a right to participate in meetings and to have a clear explanation of their options. The school must provide evidence that their child has a disability that adversely affects school performance in order for them to then be referred as eligible for services. Once placement is made, if that's appropriate, then the team must explain again and justify that placement if it constitutes a removal from the general ed classroom. The parent must understand why this is taking place and what was done prior to that. Again, the parent must provide consent for this to be delivered, and they have the right to revoke that. Their confidentiality should be protected throughout this process as well. And parents also have the right to be notified of the progress toward the IEP goals that are developed. Normally this happens at the same time as general ed students get feedback on their report cards on grading periods. Also during placement, if the parents have an issue or concern, disagreement, they have a few options to dispute that, which are mediation and due process hearing, and those are clearly outlined in the procedural safeguards handbook. Along with that, if there's any social emotional issues involved, there are disciplinary guidelines in the handbook that really delineate how that's handled with students in special ed as far as disciplinary issues. There's more information. Now that we understand parent rights in eligibility, we'll discuss 3 systems that schools use to determine if students are eligible for special education services. These are Response to Intervention, or RTI, Progress Monitoring, and the Colorado Growth Model. Response to Intervention is a multi-tier approach that we use to identify and support students with learning and behavior needs. It uses research-based interventions, either academic or behavioral, depending on the needs of the child. In order to be effective, it must include high-quality instruction, ongoing student assessment, tiered instruction to account for different learning styles, and parental involvement. The first step in the RTI process, or the first tier, is high-quality instruction. By establishing this, we eliminate the possibility that poor instruction is creating the problem for the student. All students are screened at this point, and group interventions are implemented within the classroom. We can use standardized and curriculum-based assessments to monitor this, and this process should not exceed 8 weeks. And at that time, students are either advanced to the next tier if they're not making progress, or if they are, they can return to the general ed curriculum with these interventions in place. At Tier 2, targeted interventions happen, usually in small group settings, but this is for struggling learners, and they're provided with these interventions at increasing levels of intensity as needed. This is monitored closely, should not exceed 1 grading period, and if they are not making adequate progress, they would proceed to Tier 3. In this tier, intensive interventions happen, normally in a one-on-one setting, that really target the skill deficits of the student. If this is still not effective, then the student is considered for eligibility for special education services. Considering parental rights, again, IDEA dictates that at any point in this RTI process, parents can request a formal evaluation if they feel warranted. And in general, as this is going on, these interventions are put in place, ongoing communication with parents is just good practice, letting them know what's going on, what progress is seen, what they can do to support their child at home. It's just another great way to keep them involved as a member of the team and work collaboratively with them for the best interest of the child. Progress monitoring is a second system that we use to determine student eligibility. This is a scientifically based practice that's used to assess students' performance and evaluate the effectiveness of instruction. So this monitoring system can be used within RTI to monitor progress and effectiveness of those interventions, and then we use that data to determine if they're eligible for special ed services if adequate progress is not shown. So within that model, progress monitoring is the method where we determine if the students are benefiting appropriately from typical instruction, and if they're not, then identifying those who aren't making progress and help to construct effective intervention programs for those students that need something more intensive. So the steps in progress monitoring are first determining the student's current level of performance, then identifying their learning goals. Then throughout the monitoring progress, we measure that and document it by comparing the expected rate of learning to the child's actual rate of learning. We can use formal and informal assessments to do that. And ideally, we want to document and measure this weekly or bi-weekly. There are many ways to document this result depending on the skill or the behavior that you're measuring. I have included a sample determination worksheet that is a chance to write down information about the child and also interventions tried and data about those interventions all collected in one place that will really help communicate that to parents. After this is monitored over several weeks or months, then instructional techniques are made and adjusted to meet the individual learning needs of the child based on their performance throughout. So, for example, if you have an intervention that you're running for 6 weeks, you would not continue with it if it's not showing to be effective. You would change that method to find something more appropriate for the child. So in order for progress monitoring measures to be effective, they need to be available in alternate forms, meaning not the same test given every time, but something that's comparable in difficulty and concepts. It should represent the performance that we're desiring at the end, to show how the child is working toward that goal, or if they are. And also the professionals that are implementing these measures must be trained. And for it to be effective and useful data, the professional using it needs to know how to use it appropriately. A third system for student eligibility is the Colorado Growth Model. This is a statistical model that calculates a student's progress on state assessments. So this is really a tool for conveying results of the student, the school, and the district to educators and to the public, including parents. The Colorado Growth Model tells us how individual students and groups are progressing from year to year toward the state standards. So we can look at different groups of students within the state, district, and school level, and we can look at track their growth to see if they are catching up or keeping up, and looking at if they're making adequate growth toward those standards. We use the results here to make decisions about how to align the curriculum to student needs, setting goals, parent involvement, professional needs of our teachers, individual student learning needs, and to plan for interventions for those not making adequate growth. The Colorado Growth Model addresses a lot of concerns that parents and teachers both have. Questions like, did my child make a year's worth of progress in a year? Is my child growing appropriately toward the standards? Did my child grow as much as his peers? These are questions that parents have that can be answered through the growth model. Teachers have similar questions. How close are their students to becoming proficient? And are there students with unusually low growth who need special attention? They can be identified through this data. So the Colorado Growth Model will show us discrepancies of students from their peers. Also gives us a clearer picture of their ability and progress. We use it to measure the effectiveness of interventions, so if the intervention is happening over time, we can see how the assessment scores change. And because they are norm-referenced assessments, they tend to be more valid and reliable. I hope this information has been helpful to you as far as remembering the importance of parents in the process of referring children for special education, and also learning more about models that help us to determine if students have a disability that's negatively impacting their performance. Because really, to reach all learners, we have to have a lot of tools in our arsenal, and these are 3 ways that we can measure and design instructional planning to meet the needs of all students. We have to have this knowledge and be professional about addressing their needs because they're all so different and unique. And we also need to remember that parents are important in this process and that we need to work together to make it happen. A final verse I'd like to point out as our responsibility of educators is to train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. This is an important charge for us and one that we should take very seriously. Thank you for your attention.